Hello, my name's Steve. I'm a bowyer here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm doing a series on how to make a self bow from start to finish. Uh, in this one, I want to talk a little bit about what makes a wood bow work, how it works. For people who are been into archery, they might already know this, but wood bows work a little differently than laminated bows, and you have to take some of these things into consideration when you're going to start building one. This is a serviceberry bow I made. So on a wood bow, this is the back, part that faces away from you. The part that faces towards your belly is the belly of the bow. And on all wood bows, when the bow is bent and you're pulling it back, the wood on the backside, the wood fibers on the backside are pulling apart, and the wood fibers on the belly side, as it comes around, are crushing together. And so that's why only certain woods make good bows, is because a bow wood has to be able to withstand that pulling apart on the back and the crushing together on the belly of the bow. So when here in the Pacific Northwest, we have quite a few different woods that bowyers use for bows. The list would be vine maple, this is serviceberry, sometimes called Juneberry or Saskatoon. It gets berries in June. Mountain maple, and there's another one closely related to vine maple called Douglas maple. They all kind of are the same. They're the maples that you'll see growing in bunches. Usually they don't get very big, and they'll have a cluster of trunks that come out. There'll be, let's see here, Pacific flowering dogwood. It gets big flowers when it blooms in May. That's about the best time to spot it in the woods. There's ocean spray. This is ocean spray. It's a little bush. It grows on the hillsides. It grows along. You'll see it growing on the embankments along logging roads and stuff. It gets a kind of a flower that is white when it's blooming, and it kind of hangs down. That's why they call it ocean spray, because it kind of hangs over, and then it dries and turns brown. And so in the wintertime, you'll see it with these brown hanging tufts off of it. Usually it grows about the size of your thumb or your pinky, but you can find bigger pieces if you look hard enough. Even a piece inch around will make a pretty heavy bow. It makes good arrows. Then there's serviceberry. This is serviceberry. Serviceberry gets, I already talked about, but it gets, has leaves that are kind of round and pointed, and they have serrations on the edges of them. Hazelnut is another one that we use. It's got like a fuzzy leaf. Same thing, it grows in bunches. There's cascara, which is a little bit weak on the belly part where it's your wood's crushing together. It's a little bit weak on that, but it's good and strong on the back. And so if you take that into consideration when you're building your bow and designing it, it works okay. We have Pacific yew wood, which is what the medieval longbows were made of here in the Northwest, although it's hard to get permits to cut it, so you have to try to find private property or something in order to cut that. But anyway, that's kind of how a wood bow works, and so that's why only certain woods will make a bow. So you want to look for woods in your area that people know make good bows. So when you're picking out a stave, your first staves, you want to, of course, when you're out in the woods, you want to look for something that's fairly straight. Now, they may look pretty straight when they're out in the woods, and then after you cut them, it seems like every time you cut them, you come home and you're like, wow, that's not nearly as straight as I thought it was when I saw it out in the woods. But as long as there's 3 points on a stave that line up, you can usually make a bow out of it. So you need to be able to have a straight line from the center of the handle of the bow, so the center of the bow, to the tips. And then in between, the bow can go snake in different directions in between. This here is a piece of choke cherry that was cut in Idaho. But if you notice, as long as I have if I put a straight edge on here, as long as it ends up in the center of the handle here and at the center of the tip, the limbs can go anywhere in between and the bow will still shoot just fine. This is a piece of yew wood, which is another example of that. See how snaky that is? But it's a straight line from this tip to the center of this handle to that tip. As long as those line up, you're usually good to go. So you want to cut your staves as tall as you can get them. You can always trim them down shorter once they're dry and you're at home. There's no reason to cut a short section if it's straight, and if you have a long section that's straight, then I always cut it as long as I can. Once you cut them, you want to seal the ends. You can seal it with wax, paraffin wax, melted. You can seal it with wood glue like Elmer's. You can seal it with like latex paint. But you want to seal the ends so that the moisture doesn't escape and you don't get checking. You want to leave the bark on. Some people talk about only cutting wood in the winter time when the sap is down, but I say cut the wood whenever you find it. If you find a good piece, it doesn't matter if it's summer or winter. If you cut it in the summer, then the bark might not pop off as easily. You may have to scrape the bark off, but that's no big deal. So I cut it whenever I can find it. Some woods will check even if you leave the bark on. This is a piece of ornamental yew wood, but it's got a big check right here going down it. And if you notice, this check also turns, and you don't want your bow wood to spiral. So if you look at a piece of bow wood and you see how this bark, you can see the bark turning on this. If your bark turns up the tree, then the grain of the wood inside the tree is going to spiral too. And so don't even bother cutting it if it's like that, because it's going to your grain in your wood's going to spiral too. So you want to look at the bark and make sure it's running straight up and down on the tree. Woods like the ocean spray check really bad. So it's best once you cut it, while it's still green, you want to split it so anyway, ocean spray and some other woods have a pith in them, and the pith is in the center of your tree, and that's got all of its moisture in it. That's where the moisture runs up through the center of the tree. So if you cut it and you don't allow the moisture to escape from this pith, that'll cause it to split. So I cut these down all the way to the pith when they're still green, and then let them dry. Sometimes I'll leave the handle section right where the handle is. You don't need to do that on all the woods, because just ones with piths, and like ocean spray is one of those. A lot of your woods that grow in bunches tend to lean, like your vine maples. The ocean spray is one, service berries sometimes. But anything that you cut that's leaning, before you cut it, you want to mark the part of the tree that's facing the sky, because that's the tension wood. That wood's holding up the weight of the tree. And if you can make a bow out of the tension wood side or the non-tension wood side of a tree, but you can't make it out of the side where the tension wood and the non-tension wood meet, or else your limbs are going to twist on you. So I used to have problems with that when I first started cutting vine maples. Some of them would helicopter on me and others wouldn't. And then John Strunk bowyer out of, really good bowyer out of Oregon, told me, you know, make sure you mark the part of the tree that's facing the sky and make that the back of your bow, and that solved all my problems with that. So if you make it out of the non-tension side, the bow's not, it'll make a bow, but it won't be as powerful, it won't be as good. What happens is on that tension side that's holding the tree up, the growth rings in the wood are tighter together because they're having to hold up that weight. So it's denser wood, and it also, it'll give your bow a lot more spring and everything if you use that tension side. For your first bows, I recommend that you make your bows pretty long, and use a longbow style bow. Short bows, a lot of people will want a shorter bow, but a shorter bow isn't going to hold up as well. The longer bow has more wood bending, so that it's more forgiving of mistakes. It's more, it's going to have longer longevity than a shorter bow. It's going to draw smoother. Short bows tend to stack when you pull them. They tend to have artificial weight, which is what stacking is, and that's because as the short bow bends around the string angle, pretty soon you're pulling against the limb like this because the string angle, you don't have as much leverage. On a longer bow, because the string is at a steeper angle, you have more leverage, and that makes the bow draw smoother. So when you're starting out, definitely I would try to make as long a bow as comfortable to you. Now, there's an old kind of rule, basic rule, that you want to take your draw length and double it and then add 20%, and that's about how long your bow should be if it's a self-made bow with no backing or anything on it. There's ways of breaking that rule and bending that rule, but those take either backing or it takes higher skill level. Your tillering, the shorter your bow gets, the more precise your tillering has to be, and the more your piece of wood has to have no flaws in it and everything. So that's why I recommend longer bows.